Bioarchaeology is the study of ancient human remains in archaeological contexts, and specifically looking at the mortuary customs, the funerary customs that lead up to the individual being buried, because the dead don't bury themselves, the living do. And so, in various ways that we see this, we have funerary bundles like we have here with the Changkai, where they would essentially encapsulate a body and wrap them with different textiles, leading up to the full body or funerary bundle to be placed in an underground mortuary complex. My name is Ben Schaefer. I am currently a PhD candidate finishing up my degrees at University of Illinois Chicago in the Field Museum of Natural History. I specialize in bioarchaeological anthropology, meaning that I study human remains in archaeological contexts. When it comes to skeletal or skeletal manifestations for human sacrifice, there's a couple of different ways that we can approach this. In specific contexts, we might see certain cut marks or sharp force trauma on the sternum, on the rib cage. We also might see blunt force trauma or being bludgeoned over the head, so hitting on the back and getting a depression fracture. Of course, with just these skeletal instances of trauma, we need it to be complemented by the archaeological context. So outside of, for example, Inca Capacocha rituals up on top of the mountains in Peru where children were being sacrificed, led up and sacrificed, it's going to be a little bit different than an actual cemetery or funerary mortuary tradition down by the community that's laid out, plotted out, and metered. So there's a few different types of human sacrifice that we see across time and space. For the most part, what I'm seeing, especially in Peru, we see a lot of chest mutilation, so trying to open up the chest and get at the heart. We see bludgeoning on the top of the head, and like I mentioned before, those are pretty typical. Other ones that are probably more unfamiliar are construction sacrifices and termination rituals, where individuals and primarily children would be placed in between beams or under specific scaffolding and then crushed to death, ensuring that their crushed bodies would ensure the durability of that building or the cessation of that building to make sure that that is no longer being in use. When it comes to auto-sacrifice, it's not just about the intentional killing of oneself, but for the most part, when it happens, it's usually done for psychological reasonings, so that the person watching it happen is also being affected. Where we see this also as a gendered practice in various societies in Asia, different societies in Africa, as well as some other places up on like the Northern European, Scandinavian area. For animal sacrifices, this is pretty typical and I feel like very common, especially in a lot of religious texts specifically. But we see a lot of animals also being sacrificed along with humans or just the animals standing alone. And what's interesting about this is that we can see different motives or motivations for what specific animal is being used, and it becomes this ritualized economy of what is actually useful to complete the ritual. So for example, up on the north coast of Peru where I work for my dissertation research at Huanchaquiro La Llama, just outside of Chanchan and Huanchaco, we're seeing a lot of llamas and alpacas or llamas that are being sacrificed, but it's a specific color of their plumage that's being used. So there's an intention of what color the llama is to be sacrificed, and if it doesn't fit that, it won't be sacrificed, or it might be used for other purposes. Ritualized killings in warfare, we can see how human sacrifice becomes this more ritualized form of death, if we just look at it in general basic terms. And so that's why we can include warfare, because we have different forms of ritual guidelines when it comes to rules of engagement for battle, especially historically and in more modern warfare. But what's interesting is that when it starts to become more individualized or more groups start to kind of break off, we start to see the rise of also modern cults that use human sacrifice in their day-to-day practices.